Hello and welcome to the Scotland Rugby News Podcast with me, your host, Bruce Aitchison from Happiness Egg-Shaped, and my pal from Scotland Rugby News himself, the one and the only Gavin Harper. Hello, sir. How are you?
Yeah, very well. Another busy week with a never-ending season, but we're getting through it. Obviously, a busy day yesterday with Scotland squad out, but plenty to talk about as ever.
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? It feels like a weird period of time. It's not pre-season. I don't really feel like we're massively building to something, but actually we are. But because the domestic season's fit, it's just weird time. Anyway, before we get there, a quick word from our sponsor. Scotland Rugby News is brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, and head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV tonight. With thousands of jobs across Scotland, you'll find the one at S1 Jobs. So start your search today. Glasgow weekend. I watched it. I found it tough when George Horne scores that try. You just think, oh right, here we go, and there wasn't a lot else to get excited about, was there?
No, it was. I think I was the opposite. I was when Henko Venter got penalised for holding on, and I kind of glanced up from my laptop, and there was 25 seconds on the clock. I thought this could be a long day, and so it proved. Look, it was tough. Glasgow never really, apart from that George Horne try, they never really got in the game. I think probably looking back, they got the selection wrong. I think they tried to be too clever and, bring Adam Hastings back, and they basically tried to kick everything. I don't think, that didn't work at all. Some individuals had some pretty tough days. I think George Horne was probably one of them. They were basically outplayed in just about every facet. And look, they scored twice late on, which makes the scoreline look a little bit more bearable. But it was tough, and I think that shows. We flew out on Saturday, very early Saturday morning, and a couple of guys were talking about, Leinster have a blip, but they still are pretty comfortable going past the Scarlets in the quarterfinal. Glasgow had a blip a few weeks ago in Dublin and took 50 points. And, I think I tweeted during the game, Glasgow were lucky at some stage that it wasn't the same again, because Leinster were right on it. Glasgow were miles off it. And I think the reality is, as Franco said after the game, Glasgow needed to be perfect and then needed Leinster to have an off day to have a chance. So, yeah, it was tough.
Yeah, and that's kind of Edinburgh, Glasgow, Scotland in recent years. That Glasgow last year got things right and built momentum towards the end of the year, but they hadn't really That's not true. They'd played well, but nobody had them as champions last year, and they built towards that, and they kind of crept up on people. When you look at the Bulls being able to put one over on the Sharks, that's a lot of analysis. That's a lot of building toward. You think Edinburgh played against the Bulls and beat them pretty well. Yep. Yet the Bulls are going into the final against Leinster. Edinburgh played well that night. The Bulls didn't play well that night. Kept players on the bench for a period of time and then brought them on, and they started to get better. So we're at that point where we need to be playing really well and hope something maybe goes wrong. But when you look at the players missing from Leinster, but the players that replace them, the depth is huge, and then the coaching team's enormous. The experience in those coaching teams. So Connacht just take on Stuart Lancaster. That's a lot of experience. That's a lot of knowledge of later stages of competitions, and that all adds to providing that base level of consistency and performance, so then you can go and peak from that. Whereas it feels like we have to really be on it to peak. I don't know if that's made a hell of a lot of sense, but
yeah, no, I think you're right. And I think, look, we talked about the experience in the coaching boxes, and I think you're right. I've written about this at the start of the week, and have written about it again for tomorrow. But look, I'm deeply, deeply concerned at some of the things that maybe Franco did say, and more actually what he didn't say after the game. I've always found Franco pretty upfront and honest, and I was amazed when he started saying things like the people who are involved in the development of this team. The alarm bells were ringing, and I'm thinking, oh, hang on a minute. I thought we had to replace Pete Murchie this summer, not the main man as well. And Franco's future's obviously been up for some sort of debate for a long time with Leicester and Wales and all that kind of stuff. But look, I have a worrying feeling that this could be, the end of where we still there?
I am, but I don't know why it disappeared.
I'm not sure what happened there. Yeah, we had a huddle with Franco after the game, and he was really emotional. He kind of stopped him to check himself in tears at one stage, and that was more about the effort he'd asked of the players rather than discussing his own future. But he did say, I'm going to have to take my time and go away and think about this. And I just that to me was alarming, because you think, well, the state Glasgow were in when he took over to the position they're in now is night and day. What happens if all of a sudden, with potentially less money, Glasgow are now having to find a head coach? That I was concerned by that, because I think Franco's done a great job, and obviously we've been talking about him for a long time as a potential to succeed Gregor. So yeah, I think there's movement to come on that.
There was chat, though, I noticed Gregor talking about Steve Tandy's not going anywhere. Obviously, DL's away with the Lions, so Fergus Pringle steps up, which gives Scott Lawson a step up. There's still talk of movement in Scottish rugby with people who, are maybe not secure in their roles. We don't know who they are and where they're coming from. Nucifora's got his plan. It feels like there's a lot of sugary pegs at the moment, and that can't be good for anybody. Glasgow at the weekend, are Glasgow, maybe this is a question, I don't know if it's a rhetorical question, are Glasgow fighting above their weight by getting to the semi-finals of the URC? But because they won it last year, that maybe doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think last year was obviously an exceptional year, and I think there was also a part of that you make your own luck and all that kind of stuff, but there was luck involved that everybody stayed fit for most of the season, and certainly towards the run-in. Your Zanders and Jack Dempsey's and Matt Fagersons were all available.
Do you know one of the biggest bits of luck? Sorry to butt in, but do you know one of the biggest bits of luck I think Glasgow have had is Tom Jordan.
Explain more.
He was a Super 6 player, and last year he became the main talking point of Scottish rugby. It was, how do you get Tom Jordan in the Scotland team? Because he has excelled for Glasgow, and then he picks up a contract with Bristol Bears, and he's attracting attention. Tom Jordan was playing for Ayr in Super 6. Now, I don't know what the expectation was, and I'm certainly not involved in that department of Scottish rugby, but he was a huge part of Glasgow's success. A huge part of Glasgow's success.
Totally, and I think that you probably haven't seen. I thought he was very good against the Stormers, but then that was a kind of peak in amongst some decent performances. But I don't think we've seen the same level the last sort of 2 or 3 months, because I think he's been asked to do so much in the absence, and Franco's discussed this, him and Stafford basically had to play every game and every minute of every game, because both Sione and Hugh Jones were out injured and for such long periods. I think the one thing, and I know we'll talk about this in a minute, but the one thing that seems to be good news is that Hugh looks like he's taken a reasonably sort of full part in Lions training. Because, that Achilles could be somebody, Franco said, it's something he'll have to manage for the rest of his career. So Yeah, I think you're right. Tom Jordan has been a big factor. I think this year, probably, if you look at the pack, somebody like Ewan Ferry has gone from, being a reliable squad player, and I think the conversation is definitely another one for maybe next week or another week about the Henko Venter situation and what Glasgow have got to replace him with. But somebody like Ewan Ferry, Jack Mann, Jari Aguntibeju, these guys have had opportunities this year. Mackenzie Duncan, Seb Stephen. I'm surprised Gregor Hiddleston's not in the Scotland squad. You think there's a lot of players there who've had to kind of step up because of the injuries to more experienced kind of first choicers, I suppose. So yeah,
and I get what you mean, but their squad player, like, we're especially now moving forward with the squads being trimmed. We're at a point where people are not stepping up. Like, you're in a squad because you're going to need to play.
Yeah.
And there's players in there that I knew nothing about until they played for Glasgow, and I still can't really pretend to know a huge amount about them. But when you see the likes of Jack Mann, who hadn't become forgotten, but everybody was wondering, is he, is he done? And now he's away, and I hope it's a great thing for him. I hope he goes and plays well and really puts his hand up and says, right, it's time for me to take this step forward. But and Freddie Douglas is going with the 20s. I know that's not Glasgow, but there are a number of players around that we're going to have to stop talking about them stepping up. The expectation now is, if you're in that squad, you're going to have to play.
Yeah, I think the point I meant, yeah, exactly. The point I was making is that they're not necessarily first choice, wouldn't be playing in playoff games, but you're right that actually all these guys and people like, Mackenzie Duncan, I think you look at a Jack Oliver who's training with Glasgow and going to be involved. I think next season they're going to have to, as you say, they're going to have to play, and they're going to have to play a part at times when international guys are away, and there's going to be a responsibility on their shoulders because, yes, there are fewer games now during international windows, but, as I said last week, if you play 2 games during the Six Nations and drop potentially 10 points, you're all of a sudden looking at from top 4 to top 8 becomes your goal. And I think that's where we have to be realistic that, Glasgow competing with the Bulls, the Sharks, Munster, Leinster is great. But if we're going to have a period of rebuilding the 2 pro teams, actually maybe the goal does drop to top 8. But I think Al Kellett will be giving me a clip round the ear for saying that. I think his goal will very much be keep Glasgow in that top 4 and keep competing. But yeah, I hope I'm wrong, but I just got a sense from Franco that he might definitely be considering just walking away if there's not a Wales or another concrete offer there, which would be a real shame.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't there. I haven't seen him. I would find that really challenging if he was to go. The Pete Murchie leaving, I hope, is another great opportunity for a Scottish coach to go and do something great in a new environment and come back stronger and wiser and able to add to, we've done that a couple of times on this pod where we've gone over all the people who are overseas doing good things and could potentially come, if you were able to hand pick your Scotland, Glasgow, Edinburgh coaching teams, they could be fully Scottish with the number of coaches we've got in areas all around the world doing good things, and you could put them together. We could have a Gala Academy former pupil coaching team, at least one of them. That, I think that's a really positive thing. But then when we've got people like Sean and Franco and coaches involved, we have to make the best of them and try and help them to develop and create the environments we keep hearing about. But actually, the performances are really tough. Like that Leinster team. That's a test team, that Leinster side. Even with injuries, they've got all 23 of their players are either capped and experienced or will be.
Yeah, and I think the difference is you would have no qualms putting a Will Connors, who filled in on the open side for Josh van der Fleer, in to, an Ireland Six Nations game where you look at maybe the guys like, for example, not to single anybody out, but a Finn Richardson who replaced Xander at the weekend. There is a drop. I know Finn Richardson's in the Scotland squad. I'm sure we'll talk about that, but we just don't have the same depth of player, and I think that really told. When you look at a bench when they were 20 points up at half time, and you bring on RG Sneeman, you think, well, it feels a bit unfair. Can Glasgow not borrow him for 20 minutes? It's just.
But they're also their test players of the top two countries in the world, top three countries. Jordy Barrett and RG Sneeman are their big ticket players from the All Blacks and the Springboks. Ireland, I don't know what the world rankings are at the moment, but Ireland are 1 or 2 or 3 in the world. So you've got a squad made up of players from the top 3 nations in the world.
Yep.
Scotland at the moment want to be top 6. The other players that we have who have come, who are not Scottish, are not that level of Jordy Barrett and RG Sneeman. So that's kind of coming back to that question. Glasgow excelled last year and are URC champions, but it feels a little bit like Leicester winning the Premier League. It was an outlier. This year we hoped they were going to do it. I think last year we probably hoped, but we didn't expect them to win it. And the Sharks are not good enough to get into the final, yet they are. Let's line up their Springbok internationals. So. A team of Springboks is not good enough to get into the final. I'm probably coming across very negative, but I'm trying to find the positives and the hope for next season for Glasgow and Edinburgh when things are getting tougher. Jamie Ritchie's gone. Xander, we hope's going to come back. Tom Jordan's gone. We're going to get on to the Scotland squad. I hope the Lions tour and the Scotland tour is a real lift for Edinburgh and Glasgow.
Yeah,
in the way that I spoke to Sean Leneen a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying, "Put your money on a Scotland Grand Slam next year because we do it after a Lions tour." Like, aye, okay, Sean, I'll probably save myself the terror, but I hope I'm wrong.
I think it's an interesting point because I think probably a few months ago there was optimism, and before the Six Nations, again, that chat of can Scotland do it had kind of resurfaced, and then it feels like we've been on a bit of a lull, and there's obviously some sort of discontent at Glasgow, and Edinburgh had their struggles, although I think they actually can look back on their season with a degree of satisfaction almost towards the end.
Do you know what I've already used the football analogy. Do you know what Edinburgh make me kind of feel like at the moment is Tottenham?
Yeah.
Like, and just won a trophy, a European trophy. Yeah, you're out the door, and the league form was tough. But we kept thinking Tottenham are going to turn us around. We kept, and Edinburgh did get better towards the end of the season, and there's definite signs for hope there as we move into next year, and players coming in, and players who are a bit older and wiser, more experienced. But sorry, I cut you off there.
No, it's all right. I just think it has been a funny period. I think you're right that if you're looking for signs of encouragement, I think one for me would be that Glasgow have shown they can. They've got a team that when everybody's back and everybody's available, and hopefully that's for more of the season this year than it is next year than it has been this year. They can compete with the very best teams. I think what has been shown is that maybe the depth, the layer under that is, as we've said for Scotland for a long number of years now, if you lose key players, and I'm talking like world-class players, and I think Scotland probably only have 3 world-class players in Finn, Sione and Xander. And you've taken two of them out of the Glasgow team for a large part of the season, and it's tough. It's really, really difficult for Glasgow to compete without their sort of two talismen. I think they've done a good job of getting as far as they got, but I think, as we've seen from from Max Williamson and Alex Samuel and Gregor Brown, the guys who were involved heavily last year, they've stepped up another level this year, and you hope that the same is true of the Gregor Hiddlestons and Ewan Ferries and Mackenzie Duncans, who've all had a shot at some point this season. So I think there's definitely signs for hope, but it's obviously been a tough finish to the season.
Yeah, it's been such a strange season to be a Scottish rugby supporter or a Glasgow supporter, an Edinburgh supporter, but often those things are one and the same. Right, gutted for Glasgow. Sad that it finished. I got a couple of messages for a couple of the players, and they're a bit gutted that they didn't feel like they put their best performance in, but that's kind of how it goes, and you didn't get another chance when you get to that knockout stage. But fair play, Glasgow, a win last year in a semi-final this year, and here's me bumping my gums about it not being that great. I would take a semi any day of the week, big fella, but we'll not dwell on that. Scotland squad announcement yesterday. So before I kind of get to the Scotland squad, and we've just spoken a bit about, mostly about Glasgow, a little bit about Edinburgh and players. Do you know one of the things that I'm feeling encouraged about? The number of players we've got who are playing, like Henderson, Redpath, obviously Finn, but he's not going to be with Scotland at the weekend. Aaron Reid, players who are playing at a really high level and seem to be consistently performing and getting good at winning. I wonder, and these guys are probably getting nice salaries, are we going to see some of them come north and begin to make up Edinburgh, Glasgow? Now, my personal view on this is I quite like there being players away, because we've only got two teams. I'll bump my gums about that a lot. But there's something, olden days of the trial. I would quite like Gregor to pick two teams and we get, fill the hive for a Reds against the Blues, and let's have a crack at this. I think it would be really interesting.
Totally would be. I think the days of that are probably gone, sadly. I'd love it. But look, I think it's an interesting point, because you look at, we'll take Glasgow for as an example. I've talked enough about Sione and Hugh. Beneath them, you've got Tom Jordan, who's now away, and Stafford, and then Duncan Munn is probably, and Ollie Smith are the next. Now, I'm not sure if it was ever an option. I'm not sure the finances of it, but if you look at Chris Harris leaving Gloucester,
you
think, well, there's a guy who's been around Scotland for a long, long time. I spoke to him at the turn of the year, and then he still had ambitions of playing for Scotland again. He still wasn't kind of closing that door. But you think, well, if nothing else, can we get him in Scotland to help an Ollie Smith or a Duncan Munn or Kerr Johnson? All these guys who are probably going to have to play a part for Glasgow next season, but they don't really have any experience. And when they turn left and right, they're not going to have a lot of experience beside them. I think that has to be part of it. If we're not going to have guys like Henko and Cancellieri who bring experiences from elsewhere, part of the model must be to try and get experienced Scottish guys back from stints. Now, I don't think that should be at the detriment of somebody like a Blair, who by his own admission had become stagnant at Edinburgh and needed a new challenge and has gone up several levels since going to France. You wouldn't like to think you were denying guys that opportunity.
No. No, and that's like Tom Jordan going and Jamie going. They go with absolutely the best of wishes. It's funny you mentioned Chris Harris. He wasn't on my list. Ben White's playing overseas and is, looks like being Gregor's first choice number 9. Yeah. Although I still feel like Dobie is. I think next year is the one for Dobie. But I find like our depth is good without being, you said world class. We've got 3 world class players. Of course, you missed Johnny Matthews, George Horn, and Darcy Graham off your list, but I'll forgive you for that for just now. But we've actually the depth chart is quite interesting, but it's difficult to pick because we don't have too many tall poppies other than a Finn Russell, Sione, and Xander. Those are probably our tallest of poppies, and that sounds mad considering how many players we've got away with the British Lions and the ones that we're probably feeling a bit hard done by. It's just where are we finding that edge? Where are we finding that chance to break into that top 5? That being really assured of being 6. Ireland they're really far down the line of being a top team in the world. The Springboks, the All Blacks, how England can keep squandering their resources, who knows? And France, like those 5 nations, it's really tough to see how Scotland or Australia or Wales or Italy or Argentina even can break into that. So then it becomes a real scrap for, can you beat everybody else?
Yeah.
And that's where that level of consistency comes. And I don't see any reason why Scotland can't beat Argentina, Australia, Wales, Italy consistently. I don't know if I've actually answered a question or I've just spouted a whole load of bile there, but we're going into this 3. Is the Maoris a test? It's not a test. This 3-game tour, and you're at I'm a wee bit twitchy.
I think with good reason. I think I'm twitchy that Scotland come home, I'll be honest, without a win at all. I am particularly worried that the Maori All Blacks will really, really final. They've got some class operators. They'll really
what an opportunity for them though as well to play in Whangarei, like the home, the sort of spiritual home of the Maori, Whangarei, play against Scotland, which will be a clash of culture. Like what an event that'll be. And there'll be all the stuff in the build-up of the marae, and Gregor said they're going for a hungy and all that stuff. Like the Maori will come out flying for that game. The crowd will be insane at that.
And I think the other thing to remember is the All Blacks have got a test series on, and there will be guys in that Maori squad who fancy their chances of pushing their way into the All Blacks reckoning. Like they're not. It's not like a side of journeymen. They're a proper good side. So I'm worried about that game. I think playing in Fiji gives its own challenges.
Yeah.
But actually, like I saw the Fiji squad was named the other week, and like they've now got so many good players who are good at doing non-Fijian things.
But they're also a bit like I was saying about the number of players we've got who are now getting used to playing and winning teams. And
exactly,
like the Fijians have now got a collection of players who are playing at such a level. And, it's a bit like Sean Edwards. A few folk have said this, and probably me as well. Sean Edwards has made the French a bit less French.
Totally.
But maintaining the things that they do really well, but taking away a bit of that defensive kind of brain fart time. The Fijians, Bill Mata would play, maybe not quite now, but maybe 2 or 3 years ago, Bill Mata would have got himself into most test teams. And the back line of that Fijian team is brutal, absolutely brutal.
Yeah, but they now can do things. They're not. I mean, you maybe still expect them to run a bit more, but you don't think. Well, actually, Fiji have to. They don't have a kicking game, so they're going to have to run everything. They've got the proper structures. That they're I think that'll be a really, really, really tough game. And obviously, Scotland lost last time we were in Fiji.
I noticed when Gregor was talking. And, you've mentioned this for weeks about these games are going to have an impact on a World Cup draw. That's not just for us. Like Fiji have got a chance to knock Scotland over and do themselves a pretty decent favour to become a quarter-final, semi-final World Cup team. But the draw will be really important for them. Samoa, exactly the same. Like, here's a chance. And to have that game at Eden Park, I think, is massive for Samoa. There's more Samoans in Auckland than there is in Samoa. So that's
So you think, but all three games, not just the rugby side of it, you've talked about there about the Samoans in Auckland. So there's one challenge. You're going to be properly up against it, but that game, I hope there's a big crowd.
Yeah, I think there will be.
But I think, there's going to probably be bits of Eden Park that aren't full. But that'll bring its own challenge. You're playing a test match in a kind of strange environment. You're, underdog, maybe not underdogs on the paper, but you're going to be against a hostile crowd. Playing in Fiji with the weather and stuff will bring its own challenges. Playing against the Maori is going to be tough. Like, I think it's a tough series, particularly when you look at the guys Scotland are going to be without. And I think, if you're looking at it analytically, I think they've got to win the two test matches. I think whatever happens with the Maori game can kind of happen because it doesn't count towards these ranking points. It'll obviously be important that they don't stutter badly there, but I think you could afford not to win that and it wouldn't be a complete disaster. But if you don't win either of the test matches, I think it becomes a real problem.
Yeah, because in the bigger scheme of things, but to beat the Maori and then you travel to Fiji, the psychology of that, but you can argue the other way, but then you've got something to react to, and but I think that I'm really pleased that it's a proper, last summer, I've got to stop moaning about it, but last summer just wound me up. This summer, it's a proper tour for a team that has got Lions away. If the Lions weren't away, you'd be expecting maybe bigger, maybe one of the top tier nations, but yeah. I think it's ideal. Some of the selections, obviously, Burke's made it, and everybody kind of wants to see what he's going to do. So, and then Cam Redpath, who has been in and been out, an injury and a little bit maybe of out of sight, out of mind, also up against Sione and Hugh Jones and Chris Harris of a period. So great opportunity for those two and for us as supporters to see them playing for Scotland.
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting points of this is there's obviously players in that squad that was named yesterday who won't probably be available. Well, they certainly won't be available the start of next week. So you think of Bayliss, Redpath, Cam Henderson are all going to play in the Premiership final at the weekend. So I think probably you're looking at somebody like a Fergus Burke might get a game against the Maori, and that will maybe depend whether he gets a cap against, I assume he will get a cap against Fiji or Samoa. But then they've also got the balance of having essentially 3 10s there. They might only start a game each.
I was surprised that Gregor sort of spoke about Tom Jordan being a 10.
Yeah, I think it's look. I think we've
for Scotland, he's not been.
Yeah, he hasn't been. You're right. He's hardly played at 10, and I think when he did, I can't remember what game that was. Wales potentially was during that disaster spell when Wales nearly came back into it. I think Tom Jordan's probably got enough credit in the bank that he's proved he can play 10, 12. Gregor had no qualms about throwing him in at 15 in the autumn, and that seemed to work pretty well. I think needs must. Look, I think he's probably better at 12, but needs must with loads of centres available, although Gregor's only decided to pick the 3, which I do think is a bit strange.
I'm interested to see, because it's going to be difficult with a squad like this at a time like this, when those 2 test matches mean so much.
Yep.
I wonder what selection's going to look like, because the Maori is the chance to play players with less pressure on because it's not a full test, but it potentially is the toughest game of the 3. The Fiji game then matters. Is he picking his first 23 for that game, knowing that actually winning is really, really important. And then I'm intrigued as to what that is. Is George Horn on the bench, or is Jamie Dobie on the bench? Is he going 6-2? Because Ben White, I think, is Gregor's first choice 9. Is Tom Jordan the first choice 10? And that's why he said he's a 10, which means it's Stafford and Redpath as his centres, which means he carries a 10 on the bench. That means Tom Jordan bumps out. Back 3, you would expect Darcy to be first choice. And then I'm kind of interested what happens. I would think Kyle Steyn will be on the other wing.
You would think so.
And then I'm not sure what he does at fullback. Are you? Do you?
I would probably go Kyle Rowe. I think probably for continuity's sake, given that 2 of that 3 have played together at club level, I think Kyle Rowe's been the one that's kind of Gregor's turn to first. So that probably would be my pick. But if he went Harry Patterson or Ollie Smith, I wouldn't sort of bat an eyelid at that. I think Harry Patterson did well on his debut. He did well last summer tour. Had a terrible season, and I actually wrote this last night that Ollie Smith seemed like he was going to be a kind of man in every squad until that terrible injury. So yeah, I think it probably is. Kyle Rowe is in the driving seat at the minute, and you would expect that Kyle Steyn. I think Kyle Steyn's got an important part to play on this tour because, chatting to Gregor yesterday, you talked about Ben White, but Ben White, Rory Darge are 2 of your more senior players. Jamie Ritchie, obviously. If any of them end up away with the Lions at any stage, there's a good chance somebody like Kyle Steyn might have to assume the captaincy.
Do you know, I was going to say that Gregor's gone with 1 captain.
I know, quite unusual. I'm a bit surprised. I'm not debating it, but I'm a bit surprised at that, given that he's kind of thrown his weight behind the co-captaincy.
Well, you've already mentioned Jamie Ritchie. You've got Grant Gilchrist there. You've already mentioned Kyle Steyn. So there are people who have had really formal. Stafford. Stafford's been a Scotland captain. So they've been given those really formal leadership roles. So I was quite surprised when I saw that Rory Darge was it makes sense because he was co-captain with Finn and Finn's not there. But I wonder. So that that means in your back row, Darge is going. Fagerson's still not quite back. But I don't think I can pick his forward pack. I don't think I know what Gregor's first choice forward pack will be.
Yeah, and I think when you look at some of the guys who've missed out, again, talked about, the Lions, and there's always changes. Gregor actually said yesterday he probably won't call anybody up if they get injuries while they're out there, unless they get an injury in a specialist position, so a prop or a hooker or a 9. But there's still a bit of time. There's still a couple of weeks before they leave. I think they'll have to make decisions on a Matt Fagerson. And Gregor sounded quite confident yesterday that he and Gregor Brown are going to be fit. But, there's still that element of doubt. It's been a long time since they played rugby. It'd be great to have them. But if there are guys who you can get in the squad that could do you a job, I'm surprised he's taken a risk on so many guys who've not played a lot towards the end of the season.
Masibaka's in. I'm interested to see if he gets capped or if he plays against the Maori.
Yeah, I think when I spoke to him, Masibaka, a few weeks ago, he was absolutely buzzing at the prospect. So he's Australian-born, but with a Fijian dad.
Yeah,
his mum's from Paisley. And
that's quite a combination, Fiji and Paisley.
It is quite an unusual mix. But he was saying like the prospect of playing a test match in Fiji would be amazing. It's like the whole village where his dad's from would be there, and so there's a lot of kind of emotion to that. I think it'd be hard then to leave him out of that game, but it's professional sport, so let's wait and see.
Speaking of professional sport, no Magnus Bradbury.
No, and I think Gregor didn't address that when he spoke to us, but having listened to another podcast, Gregor did speak about that, where he said that he alluded to the fact it was for personal reasons rather than purely rugby and purely form. So I think we were just chatting before we came on air. I think Magnus is due to get married this summer. So you hope it's that, and there's no other kind of more sinister reasons behind it. Look, I think if I was picking a squad, I think I'd have Magnus in it. I think he's been excellent for Edinburgh towards the end of the season. I think he still has a lot to offer Scotland, and I hope he gets the chance to show that. I suppose the other one that people talk about all the time when these squads are out is no Johnny Matthews, and I've seen fewer comments about Johnny Matthews this time than I have Magnus Bradbury or Rory Hutchinson. Seems to be the other one that people are aggrieved about. And
I think there's a feeling with Johnny now that there's just no the expectation that he's going to make it. I don't think it matters what he does. I don't think he's getting in.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. The Hutchinson one, Gregor explained, was he wanted basically to take players who were development players who might only play one game. So he didn't want to take a guy who was, an experienced player to play potentially one game on the other side of the world. So let's see how that plays out. But I do get the feeling he's another one who, you throw Hugh Jones and Sione back into the mix, and it feels a long way back for somebody who's, as I said before, has won 8 caps in 6 years. It's just not happened for him at test level. And, you speak to anybody at Northampton and they rave about him and watch Northampton, and he's so central to everything they do that from an attack point of view, that it's amazing that it's bizarre that it hasn't worked. It's a shame he hasn't sort of established himself. But it's another one that I can't see there being much sort of change on now.
I mean, you think of the centres, Sione and Shuggy, and then you've got Matt Curry and Stafford and Tom Jordan, and you've got Hutchison, and you've got Chris Harris, who's not getting a game. That's what I was back to, talking about a lot of the depth. The tall poppies are Sione and Hugh Jones, and then, but after that, there's a lot of very good players. But how are we ever going to know how good they are, because they can't get in, they can't play. It's back to you saying before, it's professional sport. I've tried to have a go at a first 15. I'm really struggling. Who's your tight head?
Genuinely, I'm not sure, and I don't mean that to be disparaging, but I think you could pick any of them and they are all of about the same level. I think Miller Mills is probably the one just ahead, because he's played in Champions Cup final, Champions Cup semi-final. He was very good in the Champions Cup semi-final. Will Hurd, I'm confused about, because he seems to be third choice at Leicester behind Joe Hayes, and Dan Cole's been a great player. Dan Cole's a great servant to English rugby, but Dan Cole is also about 40 years old, and the fact that
I think he went to school with Donkey Weir, didn't he?
The fact that we've got a guy who's 15 years younger and can't get in the squad makes me worry a wee bit. I'm very surprised, actually, that Darcy Ray, who I think scrummaged well for Edinburgh, isn't in. I think he was in during the Six Nations, so that again suggests there's a bit of doubt there. Rhys Littrick, who signed for Edinburgh, was another one that we kind of talked about as being a potential when we did our squad predictors. Look, Finn Richardson's done some okay stuff, but he really was taken to task by Andrew Porter, as many have been at the weekend. I honestly don't know. Give me the rest of your starting 15.
Well, the backs, I think, probably pick themselves: Kyle Rowe, Darcy Graham, Cam Redpath, Stafford McDowell, Kyle Stein, Tom Jordan, Ben White, with a bench of Dobie, Burke and Curry.
Okay, yeah.
And then the back row I find difficult because I think it would be Richie, Darge and Fagerson, but then that's Muncaster can't be far away, Bayliss can't be far away, Christie can't be far away. So I'm not sure. Second row, I think Gilco probably is there.
Yeah.
With Henderson alongside him.
I think that's fair. Yeah, and that to me, like we've talked about this loads of times, but that to me feels like a better balance. That was one of the things I criticised Scotland for during the Six Nations, was having Johnny Gray and Gilco, who felt like they were both struggling to get about the pitch, as sort of you expect a second row if you compare them to a Tadhg Beirne or a Maro Itoje. I think Henderson can do that. Gilco gives you that sort of tight headlock and he'll run the line out. I wouldn't have any complaints with that. I take it you've gone Sutherland,
Turner, Miller, Mills.
Yeah, and again, the George Turner one's interesting. You know, Gregor said yesterday he wasn't sure when he went to Japan if that was going to be a long-term thing, if that was going to be the door closed. So great to have him back.
I find, though, that's a funny statement to make.
Well, I think it was based on the Japanese season runs over the course of the Six Nations. So he wouldn't have been available for all of the Six Nations.
But is that not a conversation that you have with, like, he was a centrally contracted player in that all the players who play for Edinburgh and Glasgow are employed by Scottish Rugby.
Yep.
Like George, you know, like how long was his contract? Was his contract just a year? Has he been bought out? He's got like what? I just, because Gregor made a funny comment about George has been away for a year, but he's not been away finding himself. Like he's been playing professional rugby. He's not, you know, the you see, there's Richie Mo'unga has now won something else. You know,
yeah.
Like there's that bit of, you know, the footballers are now going to Saudi. It's not as demanding, but they're still performing as professional athletes. And they're not having the same demand on them. So actually, George Turner could come back into camp absolutely flying, fresh. Yes, I get another chance with Scotland, and I'm getting to go on holiday in New Zealand and Fiji. Like,
and I'm going to get to run about and whack people because, I pity the first person that George Turner's on the other end of a contact drill.
Here's my 10 pence on it at William Hill. George Turner to be a British Lion by the end of the summer.
Do you know what? And Rob said this in a column he wrote a few weeks ago. He would have been in that conversation, and when you look at the problems the Lions have got with Jamie George joining the squad in Portugal, had George Turner been about for a full year, you think, well, he wouldn't have been far away from being in that mix. I think just while we're on the subject of front row, we asked Gregor yesterday about Dave Cherry, who's obviously not in the squad.
I was surprised how much he spoke about him.
Yeah, so he's still injured, I think, is the first point. But secondly, he's obviously going to Van. I think some players, it's useful for them to have time to just go and settle in, do what they're doing. And then I actually asked him, because Van will be playing in Pro D2 next year, I said, well, is that a concern? There's Perpignan have got a relegation playoff game. Is that a concern for Jamie? And he indicated no. You know, Masibaka this year's played in the second division. Ewan Johnson's played in the second. So he says, look, I'm quite relaxed about it. The level of that is still. So if people are wondering, well, does Jamie Ritchie move into potentially a second division team, throw his kind of Scotland future in any doubt? I think the short answer is no.
The story I was reading, and I'm actually reading a book on French rugby at the moment, and it's on how difficult a league that is.
Yeah.
And there's so many teams in it now who are battling to get up, and they've got quality players. And I think I read something about English players getting tapped up by Pro D teams to go and play there because they're trying to get into the top 14. So that the level of competition in that division is going to be unreal. It's going to be a lot higher than it would be in a URC Division 2 or the Championship in England. The standard of that competition is brutal. You look at some of the England internationals that are playing in that division, and it's going to be tough. And those French players, you talking about George Turner on the end of some of those French players would eat some of their family members to get a French cap.
Yeah,
but they're not going to get picked for France playing in the second division, so they're doing everything they can to get either a move or get their team up. So yeah, and I think it's great for the players like George going away. I think it's brilliant for him to come back and be playing the Premiership next year. I think it's brilliant for him and for Scotland.
Yeah, totally agree. I think we talked earlier about players going away, and I think for people to experience new things, George is obviously signed for Harlequins next year.
Yeah,
that to me feels like such a good fit. I think he'll learn a lot playing in the Prem every week. I think it can only be a good thing that he's now back available for Scotland. And as you say, if there's an injury or two in Australia, it wouldn't surprise me one bit if he gets that call up at some point in the summer.
Yeah. Although I've probably come across quite negative, I'm excited about that team because the Lions are away, and they're away for good reason. The players who didn't go last summer, I wasn't sure why that was. So this year, Gregor's picked who we have to guess is his next in line. You add the Lions back to that, and hopefully by the time they come back for autumn tests, you're thinking, right, come on then, everybody, show us what you've done and what you've learned and how you've come together. And the world rankings are really, really important. That there's no, I think Gregor, for everything beyond the Maori, has to be what he thinks is his best 23.
Yeah, and I think that's now the case for maybe not the game against America, but certainly when you look at All Blacks, Argentina, I think Tonga as well in November is maybe a wee bit more developmental. But, there are games that Scotland maybe have taken risks in the past that you now are saying, actually, can we leave all that development stuff till after the next World Cup? And maybe that's, in hindsight, where that tour last year was to go totally developmental was maybe the right move because you're not really going to get another chance. But look, ultimately, Scotland need to be in that top sort of couple of brackets. If Scotland have got two big teams again in the next World Cup, it's going to be really tough. And I think there's a lot to happen between now and then, but they need to start well, and that means winning, I think, minimum 2 out of 3 on the tour.
Yeah, and let's face it, it has to be the tests. It has to be the tests. You said there is a danger to come back with 3 donuts, but there's also a chance to come back with 3 wins and be here's me back to Scotland winning the World Cup again. But to come back having won 3, world ranking looks good. Hopefully the players go on the Lions tour, come back fit and ready. Scotland players get a couple of call-ups, so we have a few more Lions by the time we're at the back of the summer. Edinburgh and Glasgow playing the URC final, Scotland win Grand Slam, and then go to the World Cup, second best in the world ranking. And hey, this game's quite easy. I don't know why I was feeling so down at the start of this podcast. You've cheered me up.
And then we'll all be saying that David Nucifora needs a 10-year contract extension. The plan is working, and everything is perfect.
Correct. And that'll give you nothing to write about.
Exactly. Where would we be if the world of Scottish rugby was perfect? I suppose just on imperfections and problems. I was obviously gutted to see that Xander's
couldn't be more gutted. He's at the revealing of his portrait. He's just. And I saw, I can't remember who it was on about Hugh Jones and how the timing's never been right for him for the Lions, but now he's fit. Well, hopefully he's fit and able to go. And folks saying about how Australia are excited because they only get a crack once every 12 years. But, is Xander, does he get another crack, or is this it? Now, I know he's been, but that's so tough. So tough.
I saw the, to be honest, the news coming out of Glasgow and the sort of words, both on the record and stuff that I'd been hearing, sounded reasonably positive. It all sounded like he was moving in the right direction. And then tail end of last week, or in fact on Saturday when we arrived at the Aviva, there was murmurings of Finlay Bealham, but actually for Tadhg Furlong, who's also an injury doubt. And I thought, well, it must be they must have, the Irish guys must have information that Furlong's really struggling, because all the noise about Xander seems to have been reasonably positive. And then now we understand he had his original calf injury was going okay. The rehab was, but then it seems to have been a new injury on Thursday, I think, of last week. That's cost him his place. And I suppose as his door shuts, the opportunity arises for Finlay Bealham. But actually, when you start to look beyond Bealham and Will Stewart, the cupboard is pretty bare for, and I've mentioned 40-year-old Dan Cole already, and he's been somebody that's been mentioned. If the Lions get one more injury, are they sending for somebody who can scrummage and not much else? And I think that's a real, if we're talking about Lions for just a minute, that's a real area of Lions concern.
Yeah, surely no Dan Cole. Surely no Dan Cole.
I mean, you wouldn't have thought so, but I think it's tough because we don't really. Well, Scotland don't have anybody else that you would probably put forward. I think Ireland's top two are there already. The other alternative is Andrew Porter's started on the tight head. So are you having to, then shift a guy back mid-tour and get another, because there's more loose heads. Nobody's really made the Welsh tight head jersey their own for a long time. I think that, one more injury, Furlong goes down, that could be a real area of concern from a Lions point of view.
Yeah. Okay, big chap. Good to chat to you.
As always.
Crazy to think that there's so much going on, and it kind of feels like the season's over for us, but there's not. We got URC final, Premiership final to come. It would be class. I saw Finn having a wee jab, but usually there's 70,000 folk having a crack at him when he plays at Twickenham. So it would be brilliant to have some more Scottish players with some silverware to shout about and get excited about, and be able to say, yeah, we know how to win too. So, all good, big fella. Keep it going. Great to speak to you. A final word from our sponsor. Scotland Rugby News was brought to you by S1 Jobs. If it's time to hand in your transfer request, and head over to s1jobs.com and upload your CV right now. There are thousands of jobs across Scotland. You'll find the one at S1 Jobs. So start your search right now. Speak to you soon, big fella. Enjoy the sunshine.
I will do. You too. Speak to you soon.